Template 2, also known as email approval, shows how to add an approval process to Template 1, my first workflow, and turn it from a completely automated system into a hybrid where the workflow automates some tasks, but the person is asked to provide the actual judgment call. Think of this as a sales response scenario where a seller requests that some information be sent to a potential customer. But the email requires approval as it may include some very detailed specifications or discount offers that are only offered to select customers. Well, a similar manual approval process would tend to be a little inconsistent as each request and reply would be handled in a slightly different manner. And that can result in lost time, some missed opportunities, and false starts where you just don't know what's happening. With an automated system such as this one, you can create a consistent process where each request for information is met with a best practice response. From here, you can add a couple of actions and connectors to create a quick prototype for almost any forms-based approval process. Well, let's look at how this works. And while we're at it, let's improve this a little bit. So the workflow starts when the user fills in an online form and clicks Submit. It then sends a pre-formatted email to the reviewer asking them to approve or reject sending an email to the customer. If approved, the workflow sends the message on to the recipient. But if rejected, the workflow sends the reviewer an email recording their decision. And then the workflow ends. So let's look at this in detail. So we open Template 2 from the dashboard. Now, before we test it, let's take a look at the form. So here's the email address for the customer, and here's the message, and here's the email for the reviewer. Now this is a nice form, but it's very low contrast. So let's add some styling to make it clear where the user should fill in the data. We'll start with the page. This is the area behind the form, and we'll make that dark, maybe with a hint of red. And then we'll make the form a little bit darker so that the areas that need to be filled in are highlighted. And we'll darken the text surrounding the text boxes to make them stand out a little better. So now we have a form that's easier to see in the dim light. And while we're at it, let's change the font as well to better align with our corporate standard. So now we have a form that's much easier to use in dim light. Just click Apply Styles and then Exit Styles, and we're done. Now while we're at it, let's add the customer's name to the form, much as we did with Template 1. So we drag a short text control out onto the form, and you'll notice the form automatically responds by rearranging the controls. We'll put it here for now. We click on the new control and let's configure it. So we have the title, our name, description, okay, and a placeholder. I'll use first and last. And I'm going to make this required as it's going to be a little embarrassing if the customer gets an email that just says Dear Blank. Well, we click Done to save our formatting, and we verify that the start event variables now include a text variable named recipient name. Notice something. This variable doesn't have an I next to it. That's because we haven't used it yet in the workflow. You'll see this whenever you look at a list of variables in a workflow. Only the variables with an I are being used. And we click Control and save the form. Next, we'll configure the express approval to include the recipient's name in the email. So we click on the ellipses in the Send an Email, select Configure. Here we are. And then we click on the Variable tab, and we select our variable. Now we'll configure the Send an Email to include the recipient's name. So again, we click on the action, select Configure. Then we add Dear space, and go to the Variables tab, select the one we want. Put comma in. And we close the message body window. And then we'll do it also to the email that we would send if we decide not to send an email to the customer. So here we are, username @ and then we're done. Then we select Publish from the toolbar and we publish the workflow. We have an opportunity here to change the name and the description of the workflow, but I'm going to stay with the version from when I saved a copy. We also have an opportunity to select production or development. We're going to select development because that keeps this workflow from counting against our license. And it also adds a development flag to any emails or forms that we create. And that will keep people from acting on any emails that might get loose during our testing. So now let's test the workflow. You'll notice we have two links to the form that we've just published. One that just runs the form, and the other that provides a code snippet that lets us embed this form into some existing web page. We'll use the simple version. And here's our form. Now we'll test it by entering a message and two email addresses. And we click Submit. And you can see that we've successfully started our workflow. And we receive an email with a request to send our message to the recipient and some pre-formatted text. Well, let's take a moment and unpack this email. Let me open the action so we can compare. Here's the for development only flag that tells everyone this is just a test. If you get it, don't act. And here's the reviewer email address from the form. And here's the message from the form. And here's the customer name and their email address from the form. And a note to the reviewer about what happens depending on how they respond, which is very useful when you suddenly get an email out of the blue. And at the very bottom of this email, the workflow has added some quick instructions about how to reply, either with an approve or reject. Now we've also added some text to this email to help you keep track of the workflow and to learn about how to use this workflow. Well, first we have some best practices about how to send emails from workflows. And then we have some information on how to track the workflow and the action that created this email. Now, this is really important when you have more than one workflow running. You need to be able to tell which email came from the workflow that you're testing and which came from an earlier version or some other workflow altogether. You'll probably want to do something similar as you develop your own workflows. And then we have this section where we've noted what communication is coming next from this workflow. Again, if you're running multiple tests, it's important to keep track of where you are and what to expect as you walk through your process. And finally, we have some related information links where you can find more information on this particular workflow. We've got a link to the product documentation where you can find a detailed guidance on how to use and extend this template. You'll also find guidance here on how to best to use the many available actions that you can add to your workflows. And we have a link to the page and community where we host this video and also provide a lot of useful links to other sites. And finally, we have a link to the Nintex Workflow Cloud community where you can share ideas with other users, get guidance from experts, and see what's new with Nintex. Now, to continue this demo, we'll select Approve. And here's the email for the customer. Here's the flag for development only. Here's their name. Here's the message. And then again, we have notes on the bottom on telling you how to resort this and debug it. Now, for detailed steps that will walk you through everything we just did, follow the link to the product documentation below this video. And please try out Template 3, our multi-reviewer document approval, to see how easy it is to add and extend this approval process with more than one reviewer, and how to shift from starting a workflow with a form to starting it based on what happens in a third-party application.